The ridge did not look like a place where men went to live. It looked like an altar where youth was ground into dust and offered up to the sky. To the men of the 77th Infantry Division, it was known as the Meta Escarpment, a sheer, jagged cliff face rising 100 feet above the blood-soaked mud of Okinawa. But to the grunts who had to scale it, it was simply Hacksaw Ridge. At the base of the cargo nets hanging from the cliff stood Desmond Doss. He didn't look like a warrior. He was thin, slight, and carried no rifle. While the men around him checked their M1 Garands and strapped on their helmets, Desmond adjusted his canvas medical pouches. His hands were steady, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, a conscientious objector, or, as he preferred to call himself, a conscientious cooperator. He had refused to touch a weapon during training, enduring the mockery of his peers, the wrath of his drill sergeants, and the threat of a court-martial. They called him a coward. They beat him in the dark of the barracks. But Desmond had stayed. He hadn't come to Okinawa to take life. He had come to save it. "Lock and load!" the shout echoed. The men climbed. Desmond followed them up into the smoke. When they breached the crest of the ridge, the world turned into an absolute screaming inferno. The Japanese army had spent years tunneling into the limestone, creating a subterranean fortress of hidden machine gun nests, pillboxes, and mortar positions. The moment the Americans gained a foothold, the trap sprung. The air tore open. Artillery shells walked across the plateau, turning rock into lethal shrapnel. Bullets buzzed like angry hornets. Men Desmond had eaten breakfast with hours before were cut down in seconds, their screams swallowed by the concussive roar of the big guns. "Medic!" The cry was everywhere, a chorus of desperation. Desmond didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees and crawled through the mud and blood, his mind narrowing to a single focus, the man in front of him. He bandaged blown open legs, applied tourniquets, injected morphine, and dragged the wounded out of the direct line of fire. For days, the battle raged in a sickening cycle of attack and counterattack. The plateau became a graveyard of charred earth and shattered bodies. Then came the morning of May 5th. The Japanese launched a massive, ferocious counteroffensive. Waves of soldiers poured out of the caves, screaming, bayonets fixed. It was a tidal wave of steel. The American line cracked. The order was given: retreat, fall back down the ridge. The able-bodied men scrambled backward, throwing themselves over the edge of the cliff and sliding down the cargo nets to safety. At the bottom, the officers took count. The casualty list was staggering. Dozens of men had been left behind on the top of the ridge, stranded in the middle of a killing zone, surrounded by an advancing enemy. But up on the plateau, hidden by a thick shroud of smoke and dust, one man had stayed behind. Desmond looked out across the desolate landscape. The smoke lifted just enough for him to see the bodies strewn across the dirt. Some were still moving. Some were crying out in whispers, too weak to scream. The Japanese were already moving across the field, systematically finishing off the survivors. Desmond felt a cold weight of terror press down on his chest. Every instinct of survival screamed at him to run, to jump over the edge, to save himself. Instead, he looked up through the smoke toward the sky. "Please, Lord," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Help me get one more." He dropped to his stomach and crawled back into the fire. He found a soldier bleeding out near a machine gun nest, dragged him 30 yards through the dirt, and brought him to the edge of the cliff. But there was no one to lower him down. Working frantically, Desmond rigged a knot he had learned back home in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a double-loop bowline that formed a makeshift sling. He slipped it around the soldier's legs and chest, then lowered him down the 100-foot drop by hand, using a tree stump as an anchor. At the bottom of the ridge, the retreating soldiers watched in disbelief as a wounded man gently descended from the smoky sky, followed a few minutes later by another, and then another. For 12 hours, Desmond Doss worked alone on the ridge. His hands were raw, the skin worn away to the meat by the rough hemp rope. His uniform was stiff with blood that wasn't his own. He was completely exhausted, his muscles trembling with fatigue. But every time he brought a man to the edge, he repeated the same prayer. "Lord, please help me get just one more." He didn't distinguish between friendships or grudges. He saved Smitty, the man who had beaten him in the barracks. He saved Captain Glover, the officer who had tried to have him kicked out of the army. He even crawled into a cave and bandaged several wounded Japanese soldiers, unable to let a human being suffer in front of him. Snipers shot at him. Grenades bounced past his head. At one point, 2 Japanese soldiers aimed their rifles directly at him, but their guns jammed. Desmond didn't notice. He just kept moving, a ghost in a medic's helmet, pulling men out of the jaws of hell. By the time night fell, Desmond had lowered roughly 75 men to safety. Only when he was absolutely certain no one else remained alive did he finally crawl down the rope himself. The next day, the 77th Infantry was ordered to take the ridge once and for all. But this time, the men refused to go up the ropes until Desmond prayed for them. The skinny kid from Virginia, once mocked as a coward, had become the backbone of the entire battalion. During that final, brutal push, Desmond was finally hit. A grenade exploded near his feet, peppering his legs with shrapnel. Rather than call another medic away from the fight, he tended to his own wounds and waited 5 hours for a stretcher. As they were carrying him off the field, Desmond saw a man with a worse injury. He rolled off the stretcher, told the bearers to take the other guy, and began crawling back to the aid station. A sniper's bullet fractured his arm along the way, but he tied a rifle stock to his broken limb as a splint and kept crawling. Months later, standing on the lawn of the White House, the frail, conscientious objector stood before President Harry Truman. The president placed the Medal of Honor around Desmond's neck. "I'm proud of you," Truman said. "You thoroughly deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." Desmond smiled softly, his thoughts drifting back to the jagged, smoky crest of Maida Escarpment. He hadn't fired a single shot. He hadn't taken a single life. He had simply gone into the darkest place on earth, held onto his faith, and reached out his hands to catch his brothers as they fell.